The weight of responsibility and heart-wiped flour from her cheek as she stared at the stack of overdue bills spread across the small desk in her family bakery's back office. The morning sun barely penetrated through the dusty window, casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the darkness creeping into her life. At 27, she had never imagined she would be fighting so desperately to keep her late grandmother's dream alive. But here she was, watching everything crumble despite her best efforts. The bakery, Sweet Haven, had been a neighborhood treasure for 40 years. Her grandmother Rosa had built it from nothing, pouring love into every recipe, every customer interaction, every dawn that found her kneading dough before the city awakened. When Rosa passed 2 years ago, she left the bakery to Sienna, trusting her to carry on the legacy. But rising rents, corporate competition, and mounting debt were proving too much for one person to handle alone. An unexpected visitor's bell above the bakery door chimed, pulling Sienna from her spiral of worrying. She quickly gathered the bills, shoving them into a drawer before heading to the front. A man stood examining the display cases with an intensity that seemed unusual for a casual customer. He was striking in a way that made her breath catch. Tall with perfectly styled black hair touched with silver at the temples, sharp jawline, and eyes the color of midnight that seemed to see right through her defenses. He wore an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than her entire month's revenue, and his presence filled the small bakery with an energy that made the air feel charged. When he turned those dark eyes on her, Sienna felt her heart skip a way that had nothing to do with stress and everything to do with pure, undeniable attraction. "You're Sienna Hart," he said. Not a question, but a statement delivered in a voice like smooth bourbon that sent shivers down her spine. "I am. Can I help you with something?" She tried to keep her voice steady, professional, even as her pulse raced. "My name is Damien Ashford. I've been observing your bakery for some time now." He moved closer to the counter, his gaze never leaving her face. "I know you're in financial trouble, Miss Hart. I know about the missed payments, the looming foreclosure, the fact that you've been skipping meals to save money." The shocking proposal. Sienna's face flushed with humiliation and anger. "How dare you investigate me? What gives you the right to pry into my private affairs?" "Because I have a solution to your problems," Damien replied calmly, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "One that benefits both of us, though I admit my needs are somewhat unconventional." Against her better judgment, Sienna found herself curious. What kind of solution? Damien placed the envelope on the counter between them. "I need a wife, not for love or companionship in the traditional sense, but to satisfy certain family trust requirements that will allow me to access my inheritance. In return, I'm prepared to pay off all your debts, cover the bakery's expenses for the next 5 years, and provide you with a generous monthly allowance. All I ask is 2 years of marriage. After that, we divorce amicably, and you walk away financially secure." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Sienna felt her world tilt on its axis. "You want to buy a wife? That's insane." "Perhaps," Damien agreed, his expression unreadable. "But it's also practical. You need money desperately, and I need to fulfill my grandfather's archaic requirements to save my company from being seized by my cousin. We can help each other." Temptation and resistance. Sienna should have laughed in his face, should have thrown him out of her bakery and never looked back. But instead, she found herself opening the envelope with trembling fingers, seeing numbers that made her head spin. $300,000, paid in full upon marriage, with monthly installments thereafter. It was more money than she'd seen in her entire life, enough to save everything her grandmother had built. "This is crazy," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Damien leaned forward, his proximity making her intensely aware of his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her thoughts scatter. Sometimes the craziest decisions lead to the most unexpected rewards. "I'm not asking you to fall in love with me, Sienna. I'm offering you a business partnership that happens to involve a marriage certificate." "Why me?" The question burst from her lips. "You could have any woman you want. Why choose someone you don't even know?" Something flickered in Damien's dark eyes, vulnerability quickly masked. Because you're genuine. In my world, that's rarer than you might think. I've done my research. You're honest, hardworking, loyal to those you love. You won't develop unrealistic expectations or try to manipulate me emotionally. And frankly, his voice dropped lower, sending heat through her body. I find you incredibly attractive, which will make the public aspects of our arrangement far more believable. The spark ignited. Sienna felt her cheeks flame at his words, her body responding to the raw honesty in his tone. There was something magnetic about Damien Ashford, something that drew her in, despite every logical reason to run away. When he reached across the counter to gently touch her hand, electricity shot up her arm, and she saw the same surprise reflected in his eyes. I know this seems insane, he continued, his thumb tracing small circles on her wrist that made rational thought nearly impossible. But I promise you this, I'll never lie to you, never force you into anything you don't want, and I will respect whatever boundaries you set. All I ask is that you consider my offer seriously. Take tonight to think about it. I'll return tomorrow evening for your answer. After he left, Sienna stood frozen in the empty bakery, her wrist still tingling from his touch. She looked around at the warm counters her grandmother had polished with love, at the vintage mixer that had churned out countless batches of cookies and cakes, at the photos on the wall documenting 40 years of community and connection. Could she really marry a stranger to save all of this? But as night fell, and she counted her remaining cash, knowing she couldn't even afford to turn on the ovens tomorrow, Sienna realized she didn't have the luxury of pride. And somewhere beneath the desperation, beneath the practical considerations, a small voice whispered that Damien Ashford had awakened something in her she thought had died long ago. Possibility, hope, and a dangerous spark of attraction that promised complications she couldn't yet imagine. A new world penthouse was nothing like Sienna had imagined. She stood in the center of the massive living room, a single suitcase looking pathetically small beside the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the glittering city below. Everything was sleek, modern, expensive marble floors, minimalist furniture, art that probably cost more than her bakery's annual revenue. It was beautiful, but it felt cold, nothing like the warm, cluttered comfort of the apartment above Sweet Haven, where she'd spent her entire life. Damien appeared in the doorway, having changed from his wedding suit into dark jeans and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. The casual look somehow made him even more devastatingly handsome, and Sienna felt her heart race as his eyes traveled over her, taking in her simple dress and nervous posture. "Your suite is through here," he said, his voice gentle, if he sensed her overwhelm. "You'll have complete privacy, your own bedroom, bathroom, even a small kitchen, if you prefer to cook for yourself." The wedding that morning had been quick, efficient, conducted at City Hall with 2 strangers as witnesses. But when Damien had kissed her to seal their vows, something had shifted. What should have been a brief, ceremonial touch had turned into something deeper, more urgent. His hands had framed her face with unexpected tenderness, and when their lips met, Sienna had felt the world fall away. The kiss had lasted longer than necessary, heated and hungry, leaving them both breathless and shaken. Now, in the intimate space of his home, that kiss hung between them like a promise neither had intended to make. Unexpected intimacy. The first week passed in a blur of adjustment. Damien worked from home most days, his office just down the hall from her suite. Sienna spent her mornings at the bakery, which felt like breathing again, that the bills were paid, and she could focus on creating rather than surviving. But the afternoons and evenings found her back at the penthouse, increasingly aware of Damien's presence in ways that made her contract feel like a flimsy barrier against mounting desire. He would bring her coffee while she worked on new recipes in the kitchen, his hand lingering on her shoulder just a moment too long. She would catch him watching her with dark, heated eyes that made her skin flush. They maintained separate bedrooms, but the distance felt more like torture than protection. One evening, Sienna was testing a new chocolate truffle recipe when Damien entered the kitchen. He moved behind her, ostensibly to see what she was making, but his proximity sent the electricity racing through her body. His chest pressed lightly against her back, his breath warm against her neck as he leaned down to inspect her work. "That smells incredible," he murmured, but his voice held an edge that suggested he wasn't talking about the chocolate. Sienna turned to face him, suddenly trapped between his body and the counter. His hands came up to grip the marble on either side of her, caging her in without actually touching her. The air between them crackled with tension. "Damien," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "What are we doing?" "I don't know," he admitted, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. "But I can't seem to stop thinking about you, about that kiss at City Hall, about how much I want to do it again." Breaking the rules before she could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent call. The moment shattered, and Damien stepped back with visible reluctance, answering the call with clipped professionalism. But the damage was done. They both knew the careful boundaries they'd established were crumbling. That night, Sienna lay in her luxurious bed, unable to sleep. She heard movement in the hallway and knew Damien was similarly restless. Around midnight, she finally gave up and wandered to the living room. Drawn by the glow of city lights, she found Damien standing at the windows, holding a glass of whiskey, still dressed despite the late hour. He turned when he heard her approach, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Can't sleep either?" he asked softly. Sienna shook her head, moving to stand beside him. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the city pulse with life below them. "Tell me about her," Sienna said quietly. "Your first wife, the one you mentioned briefly." Damien's jaw tightened, but after a moment, he began to speak. "Her name was Catherine. We married young, too young really. I was 23, just starting my company, convinced I could conquer the world. She was beautiful, vibrant, everything I thought I wanted." He paused, taking a long drink. "We were married for 3 years when she got sick, cancer. It was aggressive, brutal. I watched her fade away over 6 months, and there was nothing I could do to save her." Walls coming down. Sienna's hand found his, squeezing gently. "I'm so sorry, Damien. After she died, I threw myself into work, built my company into an empire, dated casually, but never let anyone close. I convinced myself I was protecting myself from that kind of pain again." He turned to face her fully, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "And then you walked into my carefully controlled world with flour on your face and fire in your eyes. And suddenly all my walls started crumbling." "This wasn't supposed to happen," Sienna whispered, even as she leaned into his touch. "I know, but it is happening, and I'm tired of fighting it." Damien set his glass down and pulled her closer, his hands settling on her waist. "Tell me to stop, Sienna. Tell me to walk away and maintain our professional arrangement. Because if you don't, I'm going to kiss you right now, and I'm not sure I'll be able to stop at just a kiss." Sienna's heart hammered against her ribs. Every logical part of her brain screamed that this was dangerous, that mixing business with pleasure would only complicate an already complex situation. But her body and heart were singing a different song, one that drowned out reason with pure want. "Don't stop," she breathed. Damien groaned, a sound of surrender and triumph mixed together. And then his mouth was on hers. This kiss was nothing like the one at City Hall. This was raw, desperate, years of loneliness and longing poured into the connection of lips and tongues and gasping breaths. His hands tangled in her hair while hers gripped his shoulders, pulling him closer. Closer, never close enough. The point of no return lifted her effortlessly, her legs wrapping around his waist as he carried her through the penthouse. They bumped into walls, into furniture, unable to break apart long enough to navigate properly. Sienna didn't care where they were going. All that mattered was Damien's mouth on hers, his hands exploring her body with reverent urgency. The way he whispered her name like a prayer against her skin. When they finally made it to his bedroom, Damien laid her gently on the massive bed, his body covering hers with delicious weight. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his own dark with desire and something deeper, something that made her chest ache. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough with barely controlled need. "Once we cross this line, Sienna, there's no going back to just business partners." She reached up to trace the strong line of his jaw, feeling the slight stubble beneath her fingertips. "I'm sure. I want you, Damien. Not because of the contract or the money. I want you because when I'm with you, I feel alive in ways I never have before." Something fierce and possessive flashed in his eyes. "You're mine," he growled, capturing her mouth again. "Contract or no contract, 2 years or forever, you're mine, Sienna." "Then prove it," she challenged breathlessly. And he did. Over and over throughout the night, Damien showed her exactly how much he wanted her, needed her, desired her. His touch was both gentle and demanding, learning every curve and sensitive spot on her body with dedicated focus. Sienna lost herself in sensation, in the feeling of being completely claimed and cherished simultaneously. Morning after dawn found them tangled together, skin against skin, hearts beating in sync. Damien's arms were wrapped protectively around her, and Sienna had never felt safer or more desired in her entire life. But as consciousness fully returned, reality began creeping back in. "What happens now?" she asked quietly, tracing patterns on his chest. Damien captured her hand, bringing it to his lips. "Now we figure out what this means. The contract said business only, but we've clearly moved beyond that." He tilted her chin up to meet his gaze. "I don't want to go back to separate bedrooms and polite distance. Do you?" "No," Sienna admitted. "But I'm scared, Damien. What if we ruin everything? What if this ends badly? Then we'll deal with it together." He kissed her forehead tenderly. "I spent 10 years protecting myself from feeling anything real. I'm done hiding, Sienna. What we have might have started as a contract, but it's become something worth fighting for." As sunlight streamed through the windows, gilding their intertwined bodies in gold, Sienna realized she was falling deeply, irrevocably in love with her contract husband. And from the way Damien held her, like she was the most precious thing in his world, she suspected he was falling to dot shadows of the past 3 months into their marriage. Sienna and Damien had settled into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. The contract sat forgotten in a drawer, replaced by genuine partnership and deepening love. Sienna's bakery was thriving, and she'd even hired 2 employees to help manage the increased business. Damien's company continued its success, and he'd begun bringing her to business events where she charmed his associates with her warmth and authenticity. But happiness. Sienna was learning, often attracted trouble. She was at the bakery one afternoon, teaching her new assistant the intricacies of Rose's famous cinnamon roll recipe, when a woman walked in. She was elegant in a predatory way, with platinum hair, cold blue eyes, and the kind of beauty that came from expensive maintenance rather than natural warmth. Something about the way she looked at Sienna made unease crawl up her spine. "You must be the infamous Sienna Hart," the woman said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Or should I say Sienna Ashford now? I'm Vanessa Rothmore, Damien's cousin." Sienna wiped her hands on her apron, extending one politely. "It's nice to meet you. Damien's mentioned you, has he?" Vanessa's smile was sharp as a knife. "How interesting, because he failed to mention to me that he was getting married. In fact, I only discovered his little secret when the trust lawyers informed me that Damien had fulfilled the marriage requirement for his inheritance." The threat Imogen Dursting dawned, cold and uncomfortable. This was the cousin Damien had mentioned, the one who stood to gain control of his company if he didn't marry by his 35th birthday. That deadline had been just 6 months away when Damien proposed his contract to Sienna. "I'm sorry you found out that way," Sienna said carefully, "but Damien and I are very happy together. Are you?" Vanessa moved closer, her eyes calculating. "Tell me, how much did he pay you to marry him?" "I'm guessing it was substantial, given how quickly this all happened. No courtship, no engagement period, just a sudden trip to City Hall." Sienna felt her face heat, but she kept her voice steady. "My relationship with Damien is none of your business." "Oh, but it is my business," Vanessa countered. "You see, I've been investigating your little arrangement. I have copies of your original contract, Sienna. The one that spells out exactly how much money changed hands for your participation in this farce. And I'm prepared to release those documents to the press, unless certain conditions are met. What conditions? Vanessa's smile turned vicious. Simple, you disappear. Divorce Damien quietly. Keep the money you've already received, and let him face the consequences of trying to manipulate the trust requirements. The lawyers can argue whether a contract marriage counts as fulfilling the terms. Either way, you'll be comfortably set up for life, and I might get what should have been mine all along, fighting for love after Vanessa left. Sienna stood trembling in her bakery, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She immediately called Damien, who arrived within 20 minutes, his face dark with fury when she explained what had happened. I'm going to destroy her, he said flatly, pacing the small office like a caged predator. She has no right to threaten you. But she does have leverage, Sienna pointed out quietly. The contract proves our marriage started as a business deal. If she releases that information, it could damage your reputation, your business relationships, maybe even invalidate your claim to the inheritance. Damien stopped pacing and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. I don't care about the money, Sienna. I care about you, about us. We'll figure this out together. But Sienna couldn't shake the fear that had taken root in her chest. That night, lying in Damien's arms, she stared at the ceiling and wondered if loving him would end up destroying everything they'd both worked so hard to build. The next morning, Vanessa made her move. The story broke on several gossip websites simultaneously, complete with photos of the contract and speculation about the fake marriage between prominent developer Damien Ashford and his hired bride. Sienna's phone exploded with calls from reporters, friends, even distant family members she hadn't spoken to in years. She wanted to hide, to disappear from the scrutiny and judgment. But Damien had other ideas. The public stand we fight, he said firmly, his hand gripping hers as they sat in his office with his legal team. We tell our story on our terms, before Vanessa can control the narrative, but the contract shows how we started, not what we've become. Damien turned to face her fully, his dark eyes burning with intensity. I love you, Sienna. Not because of a piece of paper, not because it's convenient, but because you've brought light and warmth and joy into a life I'd let grow cold and empty. I want the world to know that what started as a business arrangement became the realest thing I've ever experienced. Tears stung Sienna's eyes. I love you too, so much it terrifies me. Then let's be terrified together. He kissed her softly before turning to his team. Set up a press conference for this afternoon. We're going to give them a story worth telling. The press conference was held at the bakery, Sienna's choice. If they were going to be vulnerable and honest, she wanted to do it surrounded by the legacy her grandmother had left her, the thing that had brought her to this point in the first place. Standing before cameras and reporters with Damien's arm strong and steady around her waist, Sienna spoke from her heart. She told them about losing her grandmother, about struggling to keep Sweet Haven alive, about the desperation that made Damien's offer seem like her only option. She didn't hide the financial arrangement or pretend they'd had a traditional romance. But then she talked about falling in love with her husband, about discovering that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings led to the most beautiful endings. She spoke about trust and partnership, and the courage it took to open your heart after you'd sworn it was safer to keep it locked away. Love conquers all. Damien shared his own story, his voice rough with emotion, as he explained about Catherine, about the years of self-imposed isolation, about the family trust requirements that had forced his hand. But mostly he talked about Sienna, about how she'd crashed through his carefully constructed walls and reminded him that life was meant to be lived, not just survived. I don't expect everyone to understand our story, he concluded, his eyes never leaving Sienna's face, but I won't apologize for how we started, because it led us to something extraordinary. My wife is the bravest, most genuine person I've ever known, and I'm grateful every day that she took a chance on a cynical stranger with a crazy proposition. The response was mixed, but overwhelmingly more positive than negative. Stories shifted from scandal to unexpected romance, from judgment to curiosity about the couple who'd found real love through unconventional means. More importantly, Damien's lawyers presented evidence of Vanessa's blackmail attempts, her manipulation of trust documents, and her history of corporate sabotage. By the end of the week, she was facing criminal charges and had lost her position within the family company. But the real victory came later, alone in their penthouse, when Damien pulled Sienna into his arms and held her like he'd never let go. "I was so scared," she admitted, her face pressed against his chest, scared that losing control of the narrative meant losing everything we'd built. "You could never lose me," Damien said fiercely, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "The contract expired weeks ago, Sienna. Our 2 years aren't even close to up, but legally you could walk away right now with everything I promised you. The fact that you're still here, that you fought for us instead of running, tells me everything I need to know about what we have." Sienna smiled through her tears. "Where else would I be? You're my home now, Damien. Not this penthouse or the financial security, but you. Your arms around me, your voice in my ear, telling me we'll face everything together. Forever begins." Damien kissed her then, deep and thorough, pouring all his love and devotion into the connection of their mouths. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he kept his forehead pressed against hers. "Marry me again," he whispered. "For real this time, not in City Hall with strangers as witnesses, but surrounded by everyone we love. A real wedding to celebrate a real marriage." "We're already married," Sienna laughed, but her heart soared at the proposal. "I know, but I want to do it right. I want to stand in front of our friends and family and pledge my life to you, with nothing hanging over us, no contracts or obligations, just pure love and commitment." He pulled back to look into her eyes. "Say yes, Sienna. Say you'll be my wife again, now and forever." "Yes," she breathed. 1,000 times yes. Their second wedding took place 6 months later in the garden behind Sweet Haven, which had been expanded and renovated into a beautiful patio space. Sienna wore a gown of ivory lace that made her look like a fairy tale princess, and when Damien saw her walking toward him, tears openly streamed down his face. The vows they spoke were their own, written from the heart about unexpected beginnings and chosen endings, about taking chances and finding home in another person's arms. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Damien pulled Sienna into his arms with a fierce protectiveness that made everyone watching sigh with romantic envy. "I'll never let you go," he whispered against her lips, echoing words he'd said countless times in the privacy of their bedroom. "Promise." Sienna smiled, her hands framing his beloved face. "Promise. You're mine, Sienna Ashford, now and forever." As he kissed her deeply, sealing their renewed commitment, Sienna melted into his embrace completely. What had started as a desperate business deal had transformed into the kind of love people wrote songs and stories about. She had taken a chance on a mysterious stranger with an impossible offer, and in return, she'd gained not just financial security, but something far more valuable: a partner, a protector, and a love that would last a lifetime. In Damien's arms, held tight against his heart, Sienna had finally found where she truly belonged.